unaware his blind wife was a secret trillionaire who just saved his failing company. His mother kicked her out into the rain, while Mistress spat on her. What she did when her husband laughed left him devastated and made him beg for mercy. The rain mixed with the spit on her cheek as Natalie stood outside the place she once called home, listening to her husband's laughter float through the window like a knife to her heart. His mother Gloria had kicked her out with words that would haunt any woman. "You're nothing but a burden, a blind fool my son was too kind to marry." But Gloria was unaware she'd just assaulted a secret trillionaire whose wealth could crush their family's legacy. Inside, his mistress Amber was probably kissing her husband now, celebrating the departure of the useless wife, completely oblivious that the blind woman she'd spat on had just saved the failing company with an anonymous donation that morning. Her husband's company had been drowning in debt, investors fleeing, bankruptcy looming like a storm cloud. But his blind wife had rescued everything while he mocked her inability to see the problems he was facing. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could see everything that mattered: his infidelity, his mother's cruelty, his mistress's gold-digging schemes, the financial mismanagement that had nearly destroyed his business. Her disability had made her invisible to them, but her billions had made her indispensable in ways they couldn't fathom. Tonight, standing in that rain, humiliated and heartbroken, she made a decision that would change everything. The phone in her hand held the power to devastate, the contacts to destroy, the evidence to annihilate. What she did when her husband laughed at her pain would teach him about consequences, about the woman he'd underestimated, about the price of betrayal. Would his devastation be complete when he realized his savior was the woman he'd thrown away? Could any amount of begging for mercy undo the cruelty he'd shown? Would his mother's arrogance survive the revelation that she'd kicked out the only person keeping them afloat? This story will teach you about the consequences of taking people for granted, how disabilities don't equate to helplessness, the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances, and how betrayal always comes with a price. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The rain hammered against Natalie's face as Gloria Brooks's manicured nails dug into her arm, dragging her toward the threshold where water pooled on expensive marble. The same marble Natalie had once run her fingers across when Derek first carried her over this threshold 3 years ago, back when his hands had been gentle instead of cruel, back when he'd whispered promises about forever while spinning her in circles until they both got dizzy and collapsed laughing on the floor that now felt cold beneath her feet as Gloria shoved her forward. "Get out of my son's house, you blind leech!" The words cut deep, yet Natalie remained silent, her white cane tapping against the doorframe as memories flooded back unbidden. 4 years ago at Riverside Coffee Shop, where she'd worn a simple apron instead of designer clothes, where she'd hidden her last name and her bank accounts and everything that had made men see dollar signs instead of the woman who just wanted to be loved for something real. Derek had been her 6th customer that morning, ordering black coffee with 2 sugars, and she'd noticed his worn briefcase and the determination in his eyes that spoke of someone building something from nothing, someone who reminded her of herself before the money had complicated everything. "Large black coffee, please," he'd said, and his smile had been genuine, not the practiced charm of men who researched her net worth before asking her out. She'd poured his coffee with hands that had once signed $50 million contracts, yet in that moment she'd been just Natalie, just a waitress making minimum wage plus tips. And when he'd left $5 on a $3 coffee, she'd felt something shift inside her chest. Hope, maybe, or the possibility that hiding her billions might actually lead to something authentic. He'd come back the next day and the day after that, always sitting at the corner table by the window where morning light painted everything gold, always asking about her favorite books instead of her last name, and 3 months of friendship had melted into love so gradually that she hadn't noticed the exact moment when friendship became something more. Their first date had been at a food truck. Fancy restaurants are for showing off, Derek had said, and I want to actually know you. And Natalie had fallen for those words, for the way he'd laughed when taco sauce dripped down his chin, for the way he'd talked about his dreams, without knowing she could make every single one come true with a phone call. 6 months later, he'd proposed with his grandmother's ring, the small diamond catching light in a way that felt more precious than anything in her vault, and she'd said yes to Derek Brooks, without ever mentioning that she was Natalie Harper, heir to the Harper technology fortune, the woman whose investment portfolio could buy his entire business 10,000 times over. Their wedding had been simple, intimate, perfect, exactly what she'd wanted after years of society galas and men who proposed before learning her middle name. And for 2 beautiful years, Natalie had played the role of supportive wife, while secretly becoming his silent partner, arranging the Pemberton account through connections he didn't know she had, funneling investments through shell companies when his cash flow struggled, watching him succeed and believing his success was entirely his own. Success had changed him slowly, like poison in water, so gradual she hadn't noticed until it was too late. Designer suits replacing his old blazers, dismissive comments about people at our level when they passed her old coffee shop, suggestions that maybe she should find friends more appropriate to our status. And Natalie had watched the man she loved disappear behind someone who cared more about appearances than the woman who'd given up her identity to love him. Then came the accident 8 months ago, the truck that had slammed into her sedan on Highway 95, the surgeries that had stolen her sight and revealed the truth about who Derek had become when he thought she couldn't see his face anymore. At first, he'd held her hand through the hospital visits, but his grip had loosened with every doctor's appointment that confirmed her blindness might be permanent, until finally he'd moved her to the guest room claiming she needed space to adjust, when really he needed space to bring Amber Castellano into their home, into their kitchen, into their bed. Natalie had discovered them 3 months ago, had heard Amber's giggle and Derek's response, "She'll never know, blind people can't see anything." And that same day she'd called her financial manager and cut off every penny of secret support she'd been funneling into Brooks' digital marketing. His company had hemorrhaged money ever since, contracts dissolving, investors fleeing, bankruptcy approaching like a storm, until yesterday when her heart had betrayed her one final time and she'd transferred $50 million to save him, even knowing he would credit Amber instead of his blind wife who'd been his savior all along. Now Gloria shoved her into the rain, and Derek's laughter rolled out from inside. Anything for the woman who rescued me. And Natalie's thumb moved across her phone screen, pressing buttons she could see perfectly clearly because Dr. Emerson's experimental treatments had restored her vision months ago, a secret she'd kept because something had told her the truth would be her greatest weapon. Natalie stood in the rain, water streaming down her face as she pulled her phone from her pocket. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced precision, dialing a number she'd memorized years ago. "Vincent, it's me," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the cold seeping into her bones. "Bring the car to the Brooks residence." Inside the house, the celebration had begun. Through the rain-streaked windows, Natalie could see champagne glasses being raised. Gloria's shrill laughter pierced through the storm. Amber was practically glowing, basking in praise that didn't belong to her. Derek stood in the center of it all, his arm around his mistress, looking relieved, actually relieved that his blind wife was finally gone. "To new beginnings," Gloria's voice carried outside. "My son is finally free from that burden. And Amber, darling, you saved everything. $50 million. Your family must really love Derek." Amber smiled, her lie sitting comfortably on her lips. "My father always said family helps family, and Derek is family now." Derek kissed her cheek. "I don't know what I would have done without you, baby. The company was dying, investors were running, bankruptcy was 3 weeks away, Then you made one phone call and everything changed." Natalie turned away from the window. The rain pelted her harder now, but she didn't move toward shelter. She stood perfectly still, counting down the minutes. Inside, the party grew louder. Someone had turned on music. Gloria was dancing, actually dancing, celebrating her son's freedom from that blind gold digger who trapped him. The irony was so thick Natalie could taste it. She was the gold, and they'd just thrown her away. 20 minutes passed. The rain hadn't let up. Natalie's dress was completely soaked through, her hair plastered to her skull, but she remained standing on the sidewalk, watching the house light up with joy that would soon turn to ashes. Headlights appeared at the end of the street. A black SUV pulled up smoothly, its tinted windows revealing nothing. The driver's door opened and Vincent stepped out, her head of security, a former Navy SEAL who'd been protecting her interests for 5 years without Derek ever knowing he existed. "Ms. Harper," Vincent said, opening an umbrella and walking toward her. He didn't flinch at her appearance, didn't ask questions. He simply held out his arm. "The car is ready." Natalie took his arm, letting him guide her to the SUV. The interior was warm, dry, luxurious. Leather seats, soft lighting, a world away from the cold rain and the house where her husband celebrated her departure. Vincent closed the door behind her and returned to the driver's seat. "Where to, Ms. Harper?" "The apartment," Natalie said, pulling a towel from the compartment beside her. "The penthouse on 5th Avenue. The SUV pulled away smoothly. Natalie didn't look back at the house. She dried her face, her hands, and pulled out her phone again. Her fingers moved quickly, opening her banking app, navigating to the corporate accounts section. The drive took 30 minutes. The penthouse apartment building rose 40 stories into the Seattle skyline, its glass exterior reflecting city lights like diamonds. Vincent pulled into the private garage, escorted Natalie to the private elevator, and used his key card to send her directly to the top floor. The elevator doors opened into luxury that Derek had never seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble floors, furniture that cost more than his annual salary, art on the walls worth millions. This was Natalie's real world, the world she'd left behind to work in a coffee shop and fall in love with a man who'd seen her as beneath him the moment he started making money. Natalie walked to the windows, looking out at the city lights. Behind her reflection in the glass, she could see herself clearly. No more pretending to be blind, no more white cane, no more helplessness. Her vision was nearly perfect now, restored by treatments Derek knew nothing about, paid for by money he never knew existed. She pulled out her phone and opened the banking app again. Brooks Digital Marketing LLC appeared on the screen. Her $50 million investment sat there, clean and clear. Below it, her finger hovered over a red button labeled "Withdraw Investment Requires Authorization." Her finger pressed the button. "Authorization required. Confirm withdrawal of $50,000 from Brooks Digital Marketing LLC." Natalie pressed "Confirm." "Withdrawal processing. Funds will be removed within 15 minutes. She set the phone down and walked to the bar, pouring herself a glass of wine. The expensive kind, the kind Derek used to say was wasted on someone who can't appreciate fine things. 15 minutes passed. Back at the Brooks residence, the celebration was reaching its peak. Derek had loosened his tie, his face flushed from champagne and relief. Gloria was showing Amber family photo albums, already planning how to erase Natalie from their history. Amber was texting her friends about her new position as Derek's savior and future wife. Derek's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His personal assistant, Monica Chen. Strange. Monica never called this late unless something was catastrophically wrong. "Monica, what's going on?" Derek's face changed instantly. The color drained from his cheeks. His hand gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What do you mean withdrawn? That's impossible. The investment just came in this morning." "A $50 million just vanished from our accounts?" Derek's voice rose to a shout. How does $50 million just disappear? Who authorized this? He was pacing now, running his free hand through his hair. Harper Consolidated Holdings? I don't know anyone. Wait, Harper? What kind of name is... Derek stopped moving. His entire body went rigid. Run that by me again, Monica. Slowly. The investment came from who? Amber stood up, her face pale. Derek? What's happening? Derek wasn't listening to her. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing, his mind clearly racing through connections he'd never bothered to make. Natalie Harper, he whispered. Gloria grabbed his arm. Derek, what's wrong? Who is Natalie Harper? Derek's phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the marble floor. His legs seemed to give out, and he sank onto the couch, his face buried in his hands. The investment didn't come from Amber's family, he said, his voice hollow. Amber's face went white. That's impossible. I told you my father. You lied, Derek said flatly, looking up at her with eyes that had finally, too late, started to see clearly. You lied about everything, didn't you? The room went silent except for the rain still hammering against the windows. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse they didn't know existed, Natalie Harper took another sip of wine and smiled. 3 weeks had passed since the $50 million vanished from Brooks' digital marketing's accounts, and Derek Brooks looked like a man who hadn't slept in years. His designer suits hung loose on his frame, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled as he signed documents that would sell his company to anonymous buyers who'd offered $45 million, barely enough to cover the debts that had piled up like corpses after the mysterious investment withdrawal. Are you certain about this, Mr. Brooks? His attorney, Richard Morrison, sat across from him in the conference room of what used to be Derek's thriving office. Once you sign, Brooks Digital Marketing no longer belongs to you. Everything you built... Everything I built is dead anyway, Derek interrupted, his voice hollow. Clients canceled contracts, employees quit. I'm drowning in debt, Richard. Selling is the only option left. Amber had left 2 weeks ago, her lies exposed when Derek had finally demanded proof of her wealthy family's existence. There was no wealthy father, no family fortune, no connections that could save him. She'd been a fraud from the beginning, and he'd been too blind to see it, too busy mocking his actually blind wife to notice the real deception happening right in front of his eyes. Gloria sat in the corner of the room, silent for once. Her earlier triumph had curdled into something bitter and fearful. The house was going into foreclosure. Her credit cards were maxed out. Everything had fallen apart so quickly, and she still didn't understand how the investment had disappeared or who Natalie Harper really was. The buyer's representatives should arrive any moment, Richard said, checking his watch. They wanted to finalize the handover today. $45 million will be wired to your account immediately upon signing, and you can start paying off. A woman walked in, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits. She wore a tailored white pantsuit that probably cost more than Derek's car, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the confidence of someone who owned the ground beneath her feet. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup subtle but flawless, and her eyes, Derek's breath caught in his throat. Those eyes. He knew those eyes. But that was impossible because those eyes could see, could focus, could look directly at him with a clarity that made his stomach drop through the floor. No, he whispered, standing so abruptly his chair toppled backward. No, that's not. You can't. Natalie Harper smiled, not the gentle, uncertain smile of the blind wife he'd thrown away. This smile was sharp, cold, victorious, the smile of a woman who'd just won a war he hadn't known he was fighting. "Hello, Derek," she said, her voice steady and clear. No hesitation, no uncertainty, no tapping cane to find her way. She walked straight to the head of the conference table and sat down like she owned it, because she was about to. "I believe we have some business to discuss." Gloria shot to her feet, her face pale. "Natalie, but you're blind. You can't see. How are you?" I could see perfectly well when you shoved me into the rain 3 weeks ago, Natalie said, her gaze shifting to her former mother-in-law. I've been able to see for months, actually. Experimental treatments at Johns Hopkins. Very expensive, but worth every penny. You'd be surprised what you notice when people think you're blind. Derek's mind was racing, connecting dots he'd been too arrogant to see before. Harper Consolidated Holdings, he breathed. The investment that disappeared. That was you. You're Natalie Harper. But you were just a waitress. You worked at a coffee shop. I worked at a coffee shop because I wanted to meet someone who loved me for me, not for my money, Natalie said calmly. One of the men beside her opened a briefcase and placed documents on the table. I'm the sole heir to Harper Technologies' fortune. My family built half the server infrastructure that powers the internet. I'm worth $12 billion, Derek. I've been worth that much since before we met. The room went silent. Richard Morrison looked like he might faint. Gloria had sunk back into her chair, her face the color of old newspaper. The $50 million that saved your company 3 weeks ago, Natalie continued. That was me. I transferred it the morning you threw me out. One last attempt to save you from yourself, even after everything you'd done. She pushed the documents across the table toward Derek. But you credited Amber instead. You celebrated my departure. You laughed while your mother called me worthless. Derek's hands were shaking violently now. Natalie, please, I didn't know. If I had known, you would have treated me differently? Natalie's voice was ice. You would have respected me, loved me. Let me be clear, Derek. You didn't love me when you thought I was poor. You didn't love me when I went blind. You loved what you thought I could do for your image, and when I became inconvenient, you threw me away like garbage. She gestured to the documents. These are the sales contracts for Brooks Digital Marketing. You're selling your company to Harper Consolidated Holdings for $45 million. After you pay your debts, the debts you accumulated because I stopped secretly supporting your business 8 months ago, you'll have approximately $400,000 left. Enough to start over, enough to go back to square one, which is exactly where you were when I met you. Derek reached for her hand across the table. Please, Natalie, please. I'll do anything. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Give me a second chance. I'll prove I've changed. Natalie pulled her hand away before he could touch her. You had 3 years of chances, Derek. I gave you everything. My heart, my support, my money, my loyalty. And you repaid me with cruelty, betrayal, and humiliation. She stood, smoothing her suit. Sign the documents. Take your money, pay your debts, and be grateful I'm leaving you with anything at all. Natalie, please. Derek was on his feet now, tears streaming down his face. He moved around the table toward her, but the 2 men in suits stepped forward, blocking his path. I love you. I never stopped loving you. I was stupid. I was blind. Please don't do this. You were blind, Natalie agreed, heading toward the door. But I'm not anymore. Sign the papers, Derek. Your company belongs to me now. She walked out without looking back, leaving Derek on his knees, begging for mercy that would never come, while Gloria wept in the corner and Richard Morrison silently pushed the contract forward. Outside, Natalie stepped into her black SUV where Vincent waited. As they pulled away, she looked back one final time at the building that housed the company she'd secretly built and just officially bought. Where to, Ms. Harper? Vincent asked. Natalie smiled, finally free. Home. The man who'd laughed at her pain would spend the rest of his life regretting the moment he underestimated his blind wife. And Natalie Harper would spend hers building an empire without him, exactly as she'd always been capable of doing. Justice, she'd learned, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just a woman reclaiming her power and walking away from those who never deserved it. Viewers, do you think Derek deserves a second chance? Drop your thought in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting stories.